Almost every Le Mans since the first one in 1923 has been historic in some regard, but few have been as unusual as 1994. It was the end of the legendary era of Group C. However, Group Cs were still dominating. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story of one of the most peculiar races in motorsport history. Just a quick side note, some of the cars in the background aren't necessarily accurate, so in place of the LMP2 cars, I have this, which is the JH Design Reflex V12R, because you can't find any early 90s LMP2 cars. This is just kind of similar looking open top late 90s Le Mans car, but it's not true to what the cars I'm referring to look like, so if you want to look those up, do that in your own time. As well, I couldn't find mods for certain cars like the Dodge Viper GTSR from the early 90s. All those seem to be taken down, and I couldn't find a free version of the 300ZX IMSA car. And then some of the cars I've just replaced them with similar looking ones, so instead of the Toyota 94CV, I have this, which is the Toyota Eagle Mark III, which looks close enough. And I don't want to get in the same situation Aidan Millward did, with like over 70 videos getting taken down due to using copyrighted imagery, so that's why I choose to use sim racing in the background, so I hope you understand that some of these aren't accurate. Porsche had almost completely dominated Group C with their 956 and 962C. It was only a matter of time before FISA, now known as the FIA, had enough and tried mixing up the rules to reel them in or effectively get them to feck off. FISA were also trying to encourage manufacturers to enter Formula 1 over the cheaper and more appealing Group C class. They tried to make the cars more expensive with various rule changes, while also mandating that the engines be F1 compliant. This drew manufacturers away, as suddenly F1 was now the more cheap and appealing option, and in 1993, Group C would race one more time. Or would they? In 1994, they announced the famous LMP1, LMP2, LMGT1 and LMGT2 classes. As it was the first year under new regulations, it was riddled with loopholes. The LMP1 cars could be Group C cars with smaller engines, which deemed the once uncompetitive Group C cars as the perfect solution for low-budget teams. Lastly, there was the GTS class, which was for entry of IMSA GTO cars. LMP1, or LMWSC as it was officially known, had a target power output of 550 brake horsepower and a minimum weight of roughly 900 kilograms. They also had a fuel tank size limit of 80 litres. LMP2 only had a target power output of 400 brake horsepower, but only a minimum weight of 620 kilograms. However, they were required to use production car engines. LMGT1 had a targeted power output of 650 horsepower, however had a minimum weight requirement of roughly a metric ton, but what would seriously mix things up for the coming years was a fuel tank size of 120 litres. LMGT2 only had a targeted power output of 450 brake horsepower, and they also had to deal with the same minimum weight requirements as LMGT1. However, they did also have the 120 litre fuel tank. Finally, the IMSA GTS class also had a 650 brake horsepower limit and the 1 ton minimum weight requirement, just like IMSA GT1. However, they only had a fuel tank size limit of 100 litres. GT2 required 200 road versions to be produced, and GT1 required 25 road versions to be produced. However, you could still enter a GT1 car while the road versions were being planned, and a single road version had to be produced and displayed on race week. This is where the loopholes become more apparent. You see, back with Group C, the 962C was also available for purchase, unlike a lot of other Group C cars. That's a lot of C's. But when they became obsolete, they had tens of 962C chassis with nothing to do with them, so they were sold off. The idea was that if you produced enough road versions of the prototype car, you could enter a prototype in the GT class. 3 companies bought them: Koenig, Chopin and Dauer. Koenig bought a few and converted them for road use, whereas Chopin and Dauer were interested in exploiting this new loophole. Chopin's attempt was tragically unsuccessful. With only one car being built by race week, they showed their unsponsored black 962C to the scrutineering team. They were asked to present their road example, and when they drove the same car around the block and returned, the scrutineers were unimpressed and Chopin's journey to Le Mans was over. Dauer, on the other hand, with their official support from Porsche, fulfilled the requirement to produce the road cars, and even with only 13 of them being built, the most successful Le Mans car of all time would race once more. The force to be reckoned with was Toyota with their 94 CV LMP1 car recycled from Group C. Eddie Irvine would step in for the now late Roland Ratzenberger, with the car still bearing his name as a tribute. If you're still watching this video and my admittedly annoying voice hasn't gotten to your head yet, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a great deal. I've got a lot of big things coming to the channel very soon. Out of the other 80 applications for that year's race were Courage, Kremer and WR Peugeot, with their eyes set firmly on the LMP2 class. Two Clayton Cunningham Nissans from the IMSA GTO class were also entered into the new IMSA GTS class. These cars had won Sebring and Daytona earlier that year, so they were looking strong headed into the race. In the GT classes, some new or returning cars were present, like De Tomaso, Alpine Renault, Bugatti, Dodge, Ferrari, Lotus, Honda and Corvette, though most of these were entered by privateer teams like ADA Engineering, Callaway and Hommel. The date was now the 18th of June 1994. The performance was incredibly mixed between all the cars, as the top three qualifiers were LMP2 cars, a Courage on pole, a Kremer in second and a WR Peugeot in third. The 50% downforce reduction from Group C to LMP1 as well as the reduced power was evident, as the average lap time was 10 seconds slower. The Dauer cars started in 4th and 6th, and for perspective, the laps set by these cars were 20 seconds slower than the fastest 962C lap set in 1990, but was 15 seconds faster than the time set by the ADA Engineering 962C LMP1 car that they were competing against. Man, that was a mouthful. The two Nissans from the GTS category qualified 9th and 12th among the field of LMP1 cars. With all the mixture, it appeared that the ACO had found the perfect formula. As the race started, the Kremer took the lead, but it was eventually retaken by the Courage. One of the Dauers, piloted by Hans Stuck, took the lead a few laps in after having spun on lap 1, and not long after, Dauer were running 1-2. After the Kremers and Courages fell back and the WR Peugeots having engine problems, the pursuit was taken up by the Toyotas. A Venturi GT1 car had an unusual incident in the Porsche curves that caused it to strike a tyre wall perilously close to some marshals. The Japanese Honda drivers were having some issues with the heat and would often be seen in the pits getting massaged or fanned. And another peculiar moment, as there was a large fuel spray when refueling one of the Dauer Porsches. This same car had a tyre blowout at the fourth chicane, which is after the pit entry lane, meaning it had to make a full lap around the track to reach the pits, which took 11 minutes, allowing Eddie Irvine in the leading Toyota to make a successful move for the race lead. But the other Toyota of Bob Volek took the lead after Irvine got held up getting new brake discs. As the other Dauer came into the pits, it ran out of fuel in the pit lane, with the commentator noting that they would have retired had that happened anywhere else on the circuit. A Kremer was also having a quick refuel as one of the mechanics slipped and fell off the side of the car, with a commentator jabbing at him that he went ace over apex. As darkness fell and the track got cooler, the tyres of the Courages became more effective and brought them back into contention, with one of them getting up to third by mid-evening. However, the other Courage retired from engine problems, and at 2 AM, Courage were out of the race entirely. A Callaway Corvette eventually stopped for a tyre change. However, there was a brief delay as the car had been accidentally let down onto a mechanic's foot. At 5 AM, the leading Toyota came into the pits with a severe vibration coming from the differential, costing an hour and 4 positions, with the other Toyota taking the lead ahead of the Dauers. One of the Dauer drivers, Thierry Boustin, had a scary moment when his headlights failed going 162 miles an hour on the approach to Tetra Rouge, with further problems leaving him 3 laps behind the leader. With the retirement of Courage and Kremer, the one remaining Nissan 300ZX GTS moved up into 4th by dawn, and the Bugatti Privateer in GT1 was making a mad dash up the leaderboard and got up into 6th overall. As the sun struggled up over the French countryside, the Toyota was still in the lead, with the second one eventually overtaking the Nissan for fourth by lunchtime when it had gearbox issues. The leading Toyota came perilously close to retirement as a backmarking Venturi wouldn't leave any room. This Venturi eventually got itself spun out by the Toyota at the Dunlop chicane. Much to their misfortune, the Bugatti team had to replace the EB110's all 4 turbos, and a later tyre blowout caused it to dramatically strike the barriers on the Mulsanne straight. Then, after having led the race for 9 hours with only 90 minutes to go, the leading Toyota came to a stop outside the pits, and hence the first of Toyota's famous Le Mans curses, losing 13 minutes to a repair job on the gear linkage wells, and it dropped to third behind both of the Dauer cars, who are now having to be careful with their weak drive shafts. When he was back on the move, Irvine made a great effort behind the wheel and managed to get back up to second with only 2 laps to go. The Dauer tried to take back the position for a glorious 1-2, but the efforts were doused by the lower classed cars crawling to the line in an effort to not have to complete another lap, a trick that has been since banned. As the Dauer cars were officially Dauer Porsche, it meant that this was the 13th victory for the famously successful German manufacturer. It also made Mauro Baldi the 100th different Le Mans winner. This was the last time the legendary 962 took the glory of Le Mans victory, the end of one era and the beginning of another, where GT racing became part of mainstream motorsport. This will always be remembered as one of the most unusual but entertaining races of all time.